And there we go. Bless you. So hi again, and hi to everybody online as well. I'm Nathan Smith. I'm the Digital Programming Coordinator here at the Central Arkansas Library System. It's been kind of a busy morning, but I'm here and ready for Excel Part 3. So before we get rolling, a few quick preliminary things to get out of the way. Let's see. I've already tackled the parking. We're good on that. Let's see. The restrooms are down the hall, on the opposite end of the hall from the stairs and the elevator. And for everybody, not just folks here in the classroom, but folks online, the other big thing I always like to say at the beginning of class is if you have questions at any point, speak up and let me know. Don't worry about whether it feels like a silly question or if you think it might be easy for me to answer or whatever. I'm not worried about that. The point of a technology class is for you to learn something useful about technology. So if that's happening, we're good to go. And if it's not, then that's not a very successful class. So if you have questions, speak up and let me know. At the very worst, I'll say, I have no idea, and we'll try and figure it out together. Or I'll say, well, I'm going to cover that here in a few minutes, which is typically what happens. But I love it when I learn something new as well. So keep those questions coming whenever they occur to you. And online, folks, please let me know if there are technical difficulties at any point as well. If you're watching one of the live streams, YouTube, Facebook, you can also put your questions in comments on Facebook or chat on YouTube, and that will also work. I will see those as well, and we can respond to those. So, I guess that's about it. Let's go ahead and get it rolling. So today's session is Excel Part 3, which is also called Color Coding, Logic, and More. Actually, let me give you this handout really quick before we get too into it. Nope, that's not the right one. This one is. I had a couple of extras in the stack that did not belong. Okay, so what we're going to do here in the classroom, I'm going to go ahead and get the little title graphic off the screen, and we're going to head to our classroom files. I'll double click on that, and in the File Explorer window that comes up, I'm going to double click Microsoft Excel, and I'm going to double click part3.xlsx. Hopefully that's squared away the way we want it to be. This is one where I have had some trouble before with, there's a little bit of weirdness in the middle there. So if we run into it, we'll solve it. It won't be a big deal. But let's do the thing. So in this session, we're going to cover a few different things. This one's kind of a hodgepodge, but it's an important hodgepodge. There's a lot of cool stuff in the hodge and the podge, if that's how that works. And so I'm glad you're here. What we'll be doing is we'll be talking about, first of all, logical functions, which sound boring, but they're awesome. They're basically a way that you can write a formula so that Excel will they're a way that you can write way cooler, way more useful formulas in Excel. We'll get there in just a sec, but definitely worth learning about. Next, we're going to talk about data validation, which can help protect you from errors in entering your data into your workbook. So very valuable. We're going to talk about getting rid of duplicates. That's super useful. We're also going to talk about protecting your spreadsheets from accidental or malicious tampering. And finally, we're going to talk about conditional formatting, which will help you automatically kind of color code and highlight your data as you're working with it. So that's what's on the agenda for today. Let's get rolling. Okay, so first things first, we're going to talk about logical functions. Here on this sheet, we've got a little contest going between Jack and Diane. They have been scoring points left and right, and now we're at the end of the year, and we want to figure out who the winner is. Now, obviously, you can kind of look at this and see who the winner is, and and type the winner's name right down here. It's obvious. But in this case, to get started with logical functions, what we're going to do is we're going to write a formula that just tells us who the winner is. So that way we can look and see it at a glance rather than having to do the math for ourselves. So here's what we're going to do to make that happen. First of all, I'm going to click in cell C15 right down here. And then I'm going to come up to the top in the formula bar, and I'm going to hit my equal sign to tell Excel to expect a formula. Pretty easy. Something's going wrong? Okay, here, let me pop over there. Well, I learned something new already, folks. Apparently there's an option to hide the formula bar. Not sure why they would even make that, but you know what? You can do it if you feel like it. So okay, up at the top here in our formula bar, I've hit the equal sign to tell Excel to expect a formula because, just a reminder from yesterday, of course, anytime you have a formula, it's got to start with an equal sign. Anytime you have something else that you don't want to be treated as a formula, for goodness sake, don't start it with an equal sign. So we got our equal sign there, and then what we're going to do next is we're going to use a new function, the if function, which is just if, the word if. So I'll type if, and I'll do Shift 9 to open a set of parentheses here. That'll give me my left parenthesis. And inside my parentheses, I've got 3 arguments, 3 things that Excel is asking me for in order to help this if function do its job. The first piece of information that it wants is what it calls a logical test. And then there are 2 optional ones, but we're going to use both throughout the course. The value if true and the value if false. So the logical test is the first one. And what that is it's just a statement, something you tell Excel that Excel is going to look at, and it's going to try and figure out whether your statement was true or false. Let me show you what I mean. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to go B14 is greater than C14. And then we'll just put a comma after that. That's our logical test. So what we've done is we've made a statement. We've said, you know what? The value in cell B14 is greater than the value in cell C14. And then it's Excel's job to figure out whether that's true or false. Now, if you look, you can see, obviously, it's false. But we're going to get there in a sec. Let's say that it was true. Our value if true is the next argument that Excel is looking for. So after the comma, that's after C14. Oh, by the way, we're using the greater than sign rather than the less than sign. The greater than sign is going to be the one with the larger end, the open end on the left, and the point on the right. The less than sign is the opposite of that. So you can keep them straight by remembering, by thinking of it, this is how I learned it in math back in school. Think of it as an alligator. The alligator always wants to eat the bigger number. So we're saying B14 is the bigger number. It's greater than C14. So I've put a comma there, and then the value if true. This is the argument, the piece of information that we want Excel to use or act on if it turns out that the value in cell B14 is greater than the value in C14. So the way this works is the value so in this case, what we want to do is we want to have Excel declare the winner of our contest, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to just give it some text, some just written information that's our value if true, and it's going to put that in our cell if it turns out that's true. The way that we do that is with a quotation mark, and then the word Jack, and then another quotation mark. So just the name Jack inside a set of quotation marks. That's our value if true. What that tells Excel is if B14 is greater than C14, Jack's name goes in cell C15, and it'll be displayed just as though we typed it there ourselves. However, if that's not true, and spoiler, it isn't, we need our value if false. So I'm going to put a comma after the quotation marks around the name Jack. And then I'm going to type in quotation marks, as you might imagine, the name Diane. I'll put another quotation mark to close it out, and I will put a right parenthesis, shift 0, right after that. And that's my formula. So, I'm going to either press enter or click the check mark up here, doesn't really matter which, and I'm going to confirm that. So now we can see that our formula is working properly. Diane's been declared the winner, and since she has 675 to Jack's mere 634, looks like the formula is working. Great. So again, let's run through really quickly what this formula does, because this is kind of important. I want to make sure that you're seeing exactly what's happening here. So our if function here basically allows you to give Excel some what we call logic in computer world, some like steps to follow, or kind of a recipe in a way, if this happens, then do this. If this happens, then do that, those sorts of things. So the if function allows Excel to act on some sort of logic. So our logical test is the first part of that. The logical test is just going to be any old statement that we can come up with where Excel can figure out if it's true or false. It could be like such and such is a blank cell. It could be, this number is bigger than this number. It could be this number is the same as this number. It could be all sorts of things. So we're just giving it some statement and saying, this is how you decide what you're going to do next. Assuming that the statement is true, then we've got our value if true, and that's the name Jack in quotation marks there. The quotation marks tell Excel this isn't anything special in terms of a word, like it's nothing. We're telling Excel, I'm not giving you a command here, I'm giving you some text that's going to make sense to humans, basically. So whenever you put something inside quotation marks, that's what it is. Again, in kind of computer programming speak, we would call this a string of text, but don't get too hung up on that. And then we've got our comma here, and then our value if false. Our value if false, of course, is Diane's name, because if B14 is not greater than C14, if C14 is greater, then Diane's name is the one we want to show up here in cell C15 and be basically the result of our formula. So that's how this formula works. But actually, there's a problem with it. What if there were more than two people? You'd probably want to, honestly, what you'd probably want to do is structure your formula very, very differently. I can see a couple ways you might try to go about it. There's a formula that finds the maximum out of a given set of numbers. So you might use something with that, and then VLOOKUP, which we'll talk about tomorrow. Things like that are probably the way to go. This is good as an example, but yeah, if there were more than two people, you'd probably have to do things pretty differently. But that's a great question. And I'll be thinking about that a little bit. I can't promise you I'll be thinking about it a whole lot because this is a crazy week, but I'll be thinking about it a little bit because that is a really good question. Okay. We've got our formula here, but there is a problem with it. Even with just two people, there's a problem with it. What if there was a tie? So I'm going to come over here, and I'm going to change Diane's number to 634, just like Jack's. When I do that, you'll notice that this did not change. Wah, wah, wah. We got a problem. So what's happening here is Diane's name is still showing up, well, because of the way we wrote our formula. We wrote it kind of correctly, but not quite. If you take a look at this, the formula is if B14 is greater than C14, then display Jack's name. If that's false, in other words, otherwise, display Diane's name. So the problem that we have here is, well, this formula only works if they don't have the same amount of points. If they are tied, then it's too bad. The formula is not going to work properly. It's still going to declare Diane the winner even though there's a tie. So what we need to do is we need to add just a little bit of extra stuff to this formula in order to make it work the way that we would really want it to. So what I'm going to do, and this is something, I guess, before we go into what the fix is, excuse me, this is something that I do want to, or that I'm showing you this is, as you're writing formulas in Excel, one of the important things that you can do is to try to break your own formulas. In other words, assume that write your formula the way you think it should be written. And then throw a bunch of different types of data in there for it to work with and see if it still does it. Not that you'll be necessarily trying to trip yourself up or cause yourself problems when you're using it from day to day. But a lot of times there are unexpected problems like this that crop up. Like if you were only thinking about this for 5 minutes, then you might go, oh, well, I've got a formula that works. It's great. But you didn't think about the possibility of a tie or whatever. So it's important to try and put different types of numbers or different scenarios into your formulas if you really want them to work fully and properly. Just test it out. And that way you can and you can crack them. So let's crack this problem. Test, 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 test. There we go. Okay, good. How strange. I don't know what that was, but yes, also a good joke. Thank you. So let's keep going. What we're going to do is I clicked in between the equal sign and the if right here. And I just hit spacebar to put a bunch of spaces in between the equal sign and the if. Y'all don't necessarily have to do that, but I'm doing it so that it's going to be easier for you to see what I'm doing next. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add another if function right next to the equal sign. So I'm going to type if again, do Shift 9 to open my set of parentheses here. And then I've got, once again, I'm being prompted for my 3 arguments: logical test, value if true, and value if false. So this time, what we want to do is, basically what we want to do to make this formula work the way that we intend it to is we want to account for the possibility of a tie. And then if there's no tie, then this formula will work just fine, because we already established if we have a higher number in B14, Jack's declared the winner. If we have a higher number in C14, then Diane's declared the winner. Tie is really the only scenario where we run into issues. So let's try and, let's account for the possibility of a tie. Inside of this if function, we're being asked for that logical test. And the logical test in this case is going to be B14 equals C14. And that's a tie. So I've got that in there. I'm going to add a comma after that. And that's our logical test right there. So if B14 is equal to C14, in other words, there's a tie, we want to put in the cell down there at the bottom the word tie. So I'm just going to put that in quotation marks. And that's it. I'm going to add a comma after that. That is our value if true. So if it's true that they're equal, then tie is the value if true in quotation marks, so that it will display as though we typed it into the cell. Then all I need to do from here, I'm being prompted for my value if false. But if it's false that there's a tie, then all we need is what we already wrote. So I'm just going to delete all those extra spaces. And I'm going to click at the end and do Shift 0 to close my parentheses that go with the if function on the far left. That's all we need to do. If I press enter or click the check mark or whatever, then sure enough, it says tie when they both say 634. But if I autofill this formula back over so that we get Diane's actual results, then Diane's declared the winner. If I change Jack's so that he has 676 or whatever, then Jack's declared the winner. So our formula is working. So that's logical function, or that's the if function. That's that's the sorts of things you can use it for. You can use it for a bunch of different stuff. The main way to think about it is if there are 2 or potentially more scenarios, then you can use the if function to make your formula behave differently depending on which scenario it is. If the time, if you're keeping some sort of time log and the time is at night, then it'll do one thing. But if the time is in the day, then it'll do another thing, or whatever the case may be. Whatever's going to work for you in your particular situation. That's one of the things I love about this. It's really flexible. You can do millions of different things with it. Things nobody's ever thought of. You might be the one to think of it. So yeah, it's pretty fun. Okay, let's switch gears though. I'm going to click on this members sheet down at the bottom. And we're going to talk about one other really useful way to use logical functions that I like a lot. So on this sheet, we have some sort of a club or organization, and we're keeping track of members' contact information. So starting in column C, we have kind of titles like Mr. and Ms. We have first names in column D. We have last names in column E. We have street address, city, state or province, zip code, country, and the phone number over here. Over here in columns A and B, we have combinations of those. So we have in column A, Mr. Pryor Myatt. Whereas over here we have Mr. Pryor Myatt. You'll notice there's no period at the end of this either. So what's happening is we're combining all these together, we're adding that period, we're putting the spaces between them. And let me show you how that formula works really quickly. We're not going to spend too much time on this because it's not that exciting, but it is useful to know about. This is a function, the formula that's already there that's putting this stuff together uses a function called concatenate. If you are if you're using a newer version of Excel, Excel 2016 and onward, then rather than concatenate, you're just going to have concat, C-O-N-C-A-T, but it doesn't matter. They do the exact same thing, and concatenate, conveniently, that's your $5 computer science word for today. What it means is take some text and put it next to some other text. That's literally all it is. So when you say, so the concatenate function, as you might imagine, takes some text and puts it next to some other text. So in this case, we're putting our title and our first name and our last name next to each other. But if we just strung them together like this, then the formula wouldn't work. You'd get Mr. Pryor Myatt, all one word. So what we need to do with the concatenate in this particular formula is we need to actually have 5 different arguments. Let me show you. The first argument is C2, where the title is. The second argument after that first comma, where it says, so it'll say text 1, so one piece of text. That's C2. Text 2 down here, our second argument, is 2 quotation marks with a period and a space in between. And that's, it looks slightly silly, but it's going to add our period at the end of Mr. or Ms., and it's going to add a space after that before the first name is listed. Then, after another comma, we've got argument number 3, or text 3, which is D2. That's the first name. Then our fourth argument is just a space in between 2 quotation marks. So that's just the space that we want to go between the first name and the last name. And finally, we have E2, the last name, is the last argument there. So that's all the concatenate function does. It's taking all this text and putting it next to some other text and making it all one thing. Mr. Pryor Myatt here. So now what we need to do is we need to, whoa, excuse me, goodness. Now what we need to do is we need to fix this formula because it actually has a slight problem as well. Let me show you what I mean. Up here on rows 2 through 8, the formula is working completely without incident. Actually, hang on just a sec. Excuse me. I think someone went down the wrong way. There we go. Okay, so rows 2 through 8, our formula is working just fine, exactly the way we would expect it to. However, down here on row 9, you'll notice you just have like a stray period in this cell. And that's because I copied the formula on down, or auto-filled it on down, excuse me, so that I could make room for more members of our club if we add them eventually. But because the formula is there and because there's that period in, you know, Mr. Pryor Myatt or Ms. Rosine Chapel or whatever, because there's that period in there, we get a stray period here in the cell. Basically, what we're telling the cell this time, or what we're telling Excel this time in this formula is, okay, take nothing, which is what's in cell C9, and put it next to a period and a space, and then take nothing, which is what's in cell D9, and put it next to that, and then put a space next to that, and then put nothing, which is in E9 as well, next to that. So our formula is working fine when it has data to work with, but when it doesn't, it gives us this stray period, which just makes things look weird. And over here, we're doing the same thing with addresses. and we've got a semicolon and a comma in there for no apparent reason. So what I want to do is I want to show you how we can use the if function to fix this as well. So I'm going to go back up to the top and I'm going to click on cell A2 where my original kind of top version of the formula is. That way we can tweak this one and then we can copy it down to all the rest of the cells that need the update. So I've selected that cell. I'm going to come over here and again I'm going to click in between the equal sign and that first letter in concatenate there. And I'm going to put a bunch of spaces just so it's easy for y'all to see what I'm doing. Then over here next to the equal sign, just to the right of the equal sign, I'm going to type if once again and open a set of parentheses, Shift 9. All right, so inside these parentheses we're being prompted again for a logical test. This time we're going to take it a little bit further because we want to check all these cells to make sure there's stuff in there before we run this formula, right? So one way to do that is using the OR function, which is another logical function actually. And I'm just going to put OR, and do Shift 9 to open yet another set of parentheses. By the way, now you can see if you go 3 layers of parentheses deep, then they turn purple. You get black on the outside, red on the inside of that, and purple on the inside of that. So inside our OR function, you'll notice we're being prompted for logical 1, comma, and then logical 2 in square brackets, logical 3, or, well, it says dot, 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 but it would keep going to logical 3, logical 4, and all that stuff if we did that. So let's do it. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to say C2 equals sign, quotation mark with nothing in between. So C2 equals quotation mark. What that tells Excel, now remember we talked about if you put something in between the quotation marks, that's what we call a string of text. So that's your, that's the information, or that's some essentially words for humans that Excel doesn't really care about, but it treats it as like one piece of something. So it's a string of text. If we put 2 quotation marks with nothing in between, that tells Excel basically an empty string of text, or an empty cell is really the best way to translate that in Excel. So what we're saying here is C2 is an empty cell. C2 is equal to empty. So I've got C2 equal sign, quotation mark. I'm going to add a comma after that. And now we're being prompted for logical 2, which is optional, but we are going to use it. And we're going to go D2 equal sign, quotation mark. D2 is a blank cell. I'm going to put a comma after that. And we're going to go E2 equal sign, quotation mark. So E2 is a blank cell. And then I'm going to do Shift 0 to close my parentheses, because that's all we need inside of our OR function. So the way the OR function works is kind of like the logical test in if. It has, in our case, it has 3 logical tests inside of it. There's logical test number 1, C2 is a blank cell. Logical test number 2, D2 is a blank cell. Logical test number 3, E2 is a blank cell. So we're giving Excel all 3 of those statements. We're saying, hey, Excel, here's a fact for you. But Excel has to figure out whether that's true or false. And it's going to look at each of these, and it's going to figure out whether they're true or false. If any of them is true, then all of this, or as Excel is kind of working through the problem, all of this stuff with the OR function gets replaced by basically true. And so now it's working through the if right here. So it's like the logical test, oh, that was true. So it's going to use the value if true here. So basically, you can use the OR function, and there are some other ones like and, to replace the regular logical test so that you can use multiple logical tests and kind of create even more possible scenarios for Excel to act on. Okay, so we've got our OR function in place. That's our logical test for the if. I'm going to put a comma after the parenthesis here. Excuse me, so I should have E2 equal sign, quotation mark, right parenthesis, and then a comma. Okay, so our value if true is going to be, well, our value if true, if it's true that if any of these logical tests, any of these statements is true, either C2 is a blank cell, D2 is a blank cell, or E2 is a blank cell, then we're going to act on this value if true. The value of true, in other words, if these cells are blank, is blank cell. So we're going to go quotation mark one more time. Basically, we want Excel to pretend this is a blank cell if there's nothing over here on that particular row. I'm going to add a comma after my quotation marks. And then our value if false is, again, going to be exactly what we had here before we started with this. So that's the concatenate function and all of these stuff where it combines the title, the first name, and the last name. Now, there's one more thing we have to do here, of course, which is click over here at the very end of the formula, hold Shift, press 0, and close out our parentheses that go with the if function. And now I'll hit the check mark or press enter or whatever. And this one works the same exact way, which is what we wanted. We've got Mr. Pryor Myatt right here. But if I come over here, find the little dot in the corner like we did yesterday, and double click on it, then we flash fill that version of the formula on down about 200 rows, I guess, something like that. And you'll notice no more stray periods. They all look blank until you click on them and you see the formula there in the formula bar. But they look blank, and that's what we want. We want to be able to just come over here and enter someone's name in. And lo and behold, it works. So you could also do this here in column B. We're not going to do that because of time, but it's there in the example file. If you've downloaded the example file to follow along, then you can. If you want the example file later on, you can get it and play around with it. But that is something that I love to do with logical functions because it makes your sheets look so much nicer and cleaner, and but they still work better. So you don't have to wait until you have data over here to copy the formula down and have the formula working for you. As soon as you put the data in, the formula is already there, it's doing its thing, and you're ready to go. Any questions about logical functions before we move on to some other stuff? Cool. All right. Let's talk about data validation. Data validation is really useful as well. So I think you'll appreciate this. Okay. In this particular example file now, or example sheet, now again, we're not going to go through each and every example because it would get kind of repetitive, but there's some opportunities for you to practice with the example file later on, things like that. For now, we're just going to do one or two of these little examples and go from there. So, all right, cool. So here's what we've got. In this example, we're working some kind of customer service cases. And we've got the name of our customer over here. We've got their account number. We've got a case number for them. We have the day that the case was opened, the number of days that it's been open using network days, and the priority for it on a scale from 1 to 10. So, so we've got all that stuff already in here. We also have 3 blank columns: the customer type, the category, and the status. And if you look over here, you'll notice we have options for all of these over here on the right-hand side. That'll be important here in a second. Our customer type is either going to be business, consumer, or government. Our category is either going to be purchase, repair, return, inquiry, or other. And our status is going to be contacted, processing, shipping, or complete. So what we're going to do first with data validation, there are some other things you can do, and I'll show you in just a moment. But what we're going to do first with data validation is we're going to apply it to this column C right here where we have the customer type. Because if you were going to sort based on customer type, and maybe even based on some other categories as well, one of the problems you might run into is if you are every single time manually entering either the word business, consumer, or government into your cells, eventually you're going to make a mistake. For instance, you might type consumer instead of consumer, or things of that nature. It's going to be really easy to do that. I do that all the time, and you're human, so I'll bet you do it too. What we want to do is we want to head that off, because if we misspell something in here, it could make our data difficult to work with. You know, it might not, if we sort it, it might not sort correctly. Or if we're putting it in a pivot table, which we'll do tomorrow, then it could, we could end up with essentially two categories where we should have one. There's the consumer category, and then there's the consumer category, or whatever. So we don't want that. We want to make sure that, particularly since there are only a few possibilities of stuff that could go in this cell, well, 3 to be exact, we want to limit it to just those 3 options, and that's it. So let's do it. First, I'm going to come up here to the top. I'm going to click on column C here so that I can have the whole thing selected. So I'll click next to column letter C, where my mouse pointer turns into a black arrow pointing down. Then I'm going to go up to the top and click on the Data tab up here, or Data if you are into Star Trek. And on this tab, we've got a bunch of different options here, some of which we're going to talk about in a sec. But for now, what we're going to do is click on Data Validation. So if I click on the words, depending on how your screen looks, if you've got a button like this, click anywhere on the button, you'll be good to go. If you've got a larger button, you might have the words data validation underneath and an icon on top. If so, when you click on the words or the little arrow next to them, you're going to get this menu. That's okay too. In this menu, you just click this where it says data validation. So either one of those works. The point is to get to this box right here, what we call the data validation dialog box. So this data validation dialog box allows us to set up data validation on whatever, you know, on the cells we have selected. So in this case, it's all of column C. So right now, under Allow, it says any value in a drop-down box. When I click on that, we get a bunch of different options here. And we're going to talk just briefly about what these do. But for now, we're just going to ignore them, and we're going to click on List in the middle here. So we'll say Allow List. There are 2 checkboxes. Again, we'll come back to what these do. Just make sure you keep them checked for the moment. And then down here under Source, we can either type in the address of a cell, or of a range of cells is usually more common with this. Or we can do kind of my preference, or at least what I'm going to show you today. We can click on this little button right here at the end of the blank. When I click on that, it's going to roll up my data validation dialog box like a window shade. And I'm going to be able to come down here and scroll over and find my 3 customer types, business, consumer, and government. And I'm going to just click on cell M2 that says business and drag down until I get the government cell in my selection as well. And when I do that, you'll notice we get some text here. We get an equal sign, and then we get $M, $2, colon, $M, $4. Remember, don't be scared of this. These are absolute references, just like we talked about yesterday. What this is saying is specifically these cells, M2 to M4, and don't change it up. So Excel has filled that in for me automatically by me just clicking and dragging around with the mouse. I'm going to hit my little, the little button again to unroll our data validation dialog box so we can see all that again. And then I'm just going to click OK. Now that I've done that, if I scroll over here to the left, I get, whenever I select a cell in column C, you'll notice I now get a little drop-down arrow right next to that cell. And when I click on the drop-down arrow, there are our options, just like we set up. So I'm going to click Consumer because Mr. John Phoenix presumably is that. Ms. Aloha Munguia also seems to be a consumer. Sophie Garrison, consumer. And City of North Frumpton, that sounds like a government. Click. Yarn Clem, etc. There's another government customer. Fromm's Frazzles, that's probably a business, right? So I can just click on these and select it directly from the drop-down menu. Or if I prefer, I can totally type it in too. So let's say I go consumer, press enter, we're good to go. It worked just like if I were typing in any other cell. But let's say I accidentally type consumer again, right? I hit enter. The value you entered is not valid. A user has restricted values that can be entered into this cell. And my options are retry, cancel, or help. If I go to help, it's going to give me essentially the help documentation that Microsoft has for Excel that talks about data validation. If I click cancel, then what it's going to do is just put the cell back the way it was before I started fiddling with it. If I click a retry, then I have the option to retype or edit whatever I just typed. So consumer, I'm looking here, okay, I just put an M instead of an N. I'll change it to consumer, press enter, and there we go. It accepts it just fine. So that's what data validation does. It stops you from those little typos and also stops you from entering things that are completely invalid. For example, spaceship. If I enter that, a user has restricted values that can be entered into this cell. I'll click cancel, and we're good to go. So that's one way that data validation can work. You can set up a list like that, and you can use drop-down boxes, and of course just the way that data validation works to keep invalid information from being entered into designated cells in your workbook. However, that's not all you can do with data validation. I'm going to click up here and we'll really quickly talk about this. Okay, first things first, let's talk about what's up here. So we chose list. We're going to talk about what the other options are in this drop down in a second. But there's two check marks here that I want to draw your attention to really quick. First of all is ignore blank. If this is unchecked, what's going to happen is Excel might kind of get a little huffy if you leave a cell blank after you go to try and edit it. So it essentially, once you go to try to edit the cell, it won't accept you leaving it blank. It will have to have some sort of, okay? What? All right. So folks are having problems seeing the screen. Let me see what's going on there. How strange. Okay, is that working? Can you see the screen now okay? Zoom's out to get me today, apparently. Okay, I can see the screen in the live stream, so it does seem to be back, I guess. Presumably. Yeah. Okay, good. All right, let me know if that happens again. It's super weird. Thanks for the heads up. Okay, so we've got the checkbox that says ignore blank. Excel is going to complain at me if I try to leave a cell blank after I start editing it. It'll only accept basically the options that are on my list. The other option is in-cell dropdown. The in-cell dropdown is the little drop-down arrow that we were using a moment ago to select different options. And that is, and if I uncheck this, data validation will still work. It will still require me to either have consumer, government, or business in those cells, but it won't give me the drop-down box to choose from. I will have to manually type it in. So, I mean, that's fine, but usually the in-cell drop-down is pretty convenient and helpful. Okay, so let's talk about some of these other data validation options. Any value, of course, is no data validation. But you could also choose whole number. If I choose whole number, I have the option to, it's going to require that I put a whole number in. In other words, it can't be a decimal number like 2.5, and it can't be, a fraction, or certainly not things like sort of imaginary or irrational type numbers like pi, things like that. It's going to have to be a whole number, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or even a negative whole number is fine, but it can't be a decimal or a fraction. So I can choose either, so from this drop-down box, I can choose either between, not between, equal to, not equal to, greater than, less than, greater than or equal to, or less than or equal to. Let's say I choose between, which is the default here. I can then go in and choose a minimum, either from a cell, or I could literally put equals 200 or whatever. And then I can choose a maximum, again, either by choosing a cell or a range of cells, or by saying like equals 1,000. Either way works, but if I have a minimum and a maximum set, then Excel will require that I put in a whole number and that it be between those two values. And if it's not, then it'll give me the same type of error message that I got when I tried to type consumer over here in column C. You could also restrict to a decimal. So it has to be a number, and it has to be a decimal number. It could be 2.0 or something like that, but it has to be a number that makes sense as a decimal. List, right here, we talked about, of course. Date and time are exactly what they sound like. And with date and time, you do have the option of going between, not between, equal to, greater than, less than, and all that stuff, just like you did with the other number options. So you could say a time between noon and 5 o'clock or whatever. Then you have your text length, and that's the number of characters. Characters, when we're talking in computer world, typically what we're referring to is the number of letters, numbers, symbols, and spaces. So if you set a text length and with a maximum of, say, 5, then if I try to type my first name, Nathan, into the cell, it's going to reject it because maximum text length is 5. So, and that's 6 characters. So that way you can set a certain length, if you've got, let's say you're creating some sort of publication and you need somebody to keep it short. That'll help them keep it short. They only have this number of characters because they only have this number of space, or this amount of space. And finally, there's custom. We're not going to go into this right now, but basically, custom will allow you to write a formula, and Excel will look at the information that you enter into your cell, basically put it into the formula, and it will figure out whether what you put in the cell is valid or not by coming to either true or false. It's a little confusing, but we're going to talk about it this type of formula in a different context when we get to conditional formatting here in a few minutes. There's also a checkbox that says apply these changes to all other cells with the same settings. Because right now I only have cell C8 selected. Since I only have cell C8 selected, if I click OK right now, it's going to change C8 but nothing else. But if I click the check mark here, it's going to select all the rest of these cells that I changed before. So that way I can update all of them at once. I can also click clear all to remove data validation from all the cells that I have selected. I'll just hit cancel for now. That'll be, and that's all we're going to do with data validation for the moment. I'm going to click on the duplicates sheet right here, and let's talk about getting rid of duplicate information. So this is a very common problem that I've run into basically ever since I started using spreadsheets for anything at all, and that's duplicate information. You know, you're combining multiple sets of information and maybe there are some duplicates in between the two sets. Or you get up to go get a snack and you come back to your computer and you just type in the same thing again and suddenly you've got a duplicate and you don't realize until much later on. Things like that. So when you have duplicates in your spreadsheets, what can you do? Well, that's why there's remove duplicates up here. Okay, first thing we need to do is we need to select our cells that we're going to be looking for duplicates in. So I'm going to hold my mouse down in cell A1 here, and I'm going to drag over and drag down until I get all my data in there down to cell J51. If for some reason you overshoot it or you get unselected or something like that, or you select too much stuff, one easy way to do this is click and hold on cell J1 and then drag back up to cell A1, because that's pretty easy. But we've got all our cells selected. Now what I want to do, of course, is I want to analyze this for duplicates. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to look for exact duplicates here. So I'm going to come up to the top, click on Remove Duplicates. And then it says, to delete duplicate values, select one or more columns that contain duplicates. So we've got all of our columns listed out here based on my headers. And you do have a checkbox that says My Data Has Headers. So if you had data and you didn't have headers at the top, you just started with the data, then you can uncheck that box and it'll show you, and it will include the first row when it's looking for duplicates. And then there's a Select All button and an Unselect All button. The Select All button is going to make sure that all these boxes down here are checked. That's what we want, because we're looking for exact duplicates. So we need one where the email address, the title, the first name, the last name, the address, the city, the state, or state or province, the zip code, the country, all that stuff is exactly the same. We're looking for those kinds of duplicates at the moment. So I'm going to click OK. 14 duplicate values found and removed. 36 unique values remain. So we got rid of 14. And if you scroll down here, sure enough, 14 blank rows right here at the bottom. Because those were exact duplicates. If I undo it, you can kind of see we used to have, well, if I undo it and it actually undoes, there we go. So if I look at, just right off the bat, we have Cyrena Kleiman right here, and you can see all that information's the same. Email address is the same, street address is the same, state or province is the same, and all that stuff. So so that's what. So removing our duplicate got rid of that. Duplicates got rid of that, so we only have one Cyrena now. Great. However, if you look at this a little more closely, we actually still have some duplicates here. They're not right together. It's a little more hidden. But if I, for example, alphabetize by the last name, you can see we have Mr. Frederick Birmingham and Mr. Freddie Birmingham, both. We have both of those people. Oh, there's Ben Howell and Benedict Howell, and so on and so forth. So you can see So you can see there could be, or there still appear to be some duplicates in our data set. Here's a quick way to sort that out though. Most of the time, so in this situation, this data might have come from a bunch of different things, but let's say this is someone placing an order in an online store that you run or something like that. If that's the case, somebody might forget they have an account and create a new one, right? Or they might forget their password and create a new account with a different email address, that sort of thing. But typically speaking, I mean, some of those you're just never going to get rid of. But typically speaking, they might forget they have an account and create a new one. Or they might, check out as a guest when they created an account last time or whatever. But there's a good way to get rid of some of these, the majority of these duplicates at least. And that is by looking at the email addresses. Because email addresses are unique. My email address here at work is nsmith@cals.org. Feel free to send me an email if you have any Excel questions after the class. But that's my email address. If somebody sends an email to nsmith@cals.org, anywhere on earth connected to the internet, then it's going to come to me, right? No, there couldn't be anybody, on the other side of, the equator or anywhere else who has that same email address as me, nsmith@cals.org. It's unique. And so we can use that to get rid of our duplicates here in this particular situation, since we have email addresses for everybody. I'm going to come up to the top and I'm going to click on Remove Duplicates again. And this time, I'm going to unselect all, and I'm only going to check the box next to email. Then when I click OK, 19 duplicate values found and removed, 31 unique values remain. So as I scroll down here, it looks pretty good. We even got down here, we had Ms. Zoe Easter, and we had Ms. Zoe Eastern. We got rid of one of those. There was no real way. Yeah, that's queuing it up. Absolutely. Megan, yes, thank you. It knows how to delete. It knows which one to delete because it deletes the one that's on the top, I do believe. Or no, I believe it keeps the one that's on top. Let me double check. But, okay. Easter and Eastern. Yeah. It keeps the one that's on top, whichever one it finds first. So, there's still some value to going through and looking manually. And it's not going to know for sure which one is which. But if it's one that's a typo, and that sort of thing, it's going to at least narrow it down to one so that so you don't have to worry about it quite so much. But yes, that's a great question. Whichever one is, any of them that are after the first one, it's going to delete those. But you could sort it however you want to. So if you want to keep the more recent ones, then presumably you have some way of telling which one's more recent and which one isn't, and you can just sort it based on most recent first and then go from there or whatever. That's a great question. So that's remove duplicates. It's pretty straightforward. It's not, not a terribly sophisticated tool, but it is darn useful. Let's go ahead and talk about protecting our work in our workbooks here. So sometimes you might need to protect your spreadsheets against either tampering or accidental changes. And Excel offers us a bunch of different ways to do this. This is the scenario where we might run into a problem. So really quickly, I'm going to check something. Y'all don't have to follow me on this bit. You'll see it, we'll get there soon enough in just a second, but I'm just going to double check it and see what, wow, okay, it's being a little, oh, okay, yeah. All right, we got to fix it first. So, okay, let me show you this, and then I'll tell you what the problem is. We can fix it, and then we'll move on with the example. It's pretty easy, and this might help you a little bit just to remember that this is a thing. So, okay, when I go to, when I right click on pretty much any of the cells in this sheet, except for these 3 cells with fake credit card information. It is fake credit card information. Don't try to use those on Amazon. When I use, or when I right click on one of any of the other cells and I click Format Cells here, it's going to give me the Format Cells dialog box. And then at the top, there's a tab called Protection. By default, and this is weird, so stick with me for a moment. By default, in Excel, all of your cells have this check mark that says locked, checked, like this. But unfortunately, I changed the example file and didn't fix it yet. So most of the cells that you'll see on your screen aren't locked like this, and they should be in order for us to do the example properly. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to give you a little bonus information here. We're going to fix it, and then we're going to do our example. Up at the top, there's a little triangle right here next to column letter A and row number 2. Spoiler alert, there's something up with that. But next to those, there's a little triangle here. I'm going to click on the triangle, and that's going to select my entire sheet from top to bottom, left to right. You don't want to do this too often. You don't want to make a lot of changes to every single cell in your entire sheet. But for this example, it's the most efficient way to do it. So I've got my entire sheet selected. I'm going to click with the right mouse button on one of the cells. By the way, if you're on a laptop and you're using a little touchpad rather than a standard mouse like this, then what you want to do is tap with 2 fingers. That does exactly the same thing as clicking with the right mouse button on a standard mouse. Okay, so we right-clicked or we tapped with 2 fingers. Now we've got Format Cells. I'm going to click on that. That gives me my Format Cells dialog box. I'm already on the Protection tab, but if you're not, click the Protection tab at the top. And then I'm going to click on the little button next to where it says Locked and make sure that that's an actual check mark rather than a little box. And then I'm going to click OK. And that is going to lock all of the cells on our sheet. And that's what we need. OK, let's do this thing. So the first thing I want to show you is hiding columns and rows. This is super duper easy, and it's pretty useful. I alluded to it a moment ago. You'll notice we start with row number 2. As far as you scroll up, you're not going to see row number 1. That's because it's hidden. What I need to do in order to see row number 1 is I need to come up to the top just above row number 2. Excuse me, and right-click on it, or again, tap with 2 fingers if you're using a touchpad. Then I'm going to click Unhide right here. And lo and behold, there is a secret top row. If I want to hide it again, I'll right-click it, and I'll click Hide. And of course, if I selected multiple rows and I right-clicked, then if I hit hide, it's going to hide all of them, but I'm not going to do that. Let's unhide row number 1 one more time. I'll right-click up here and click Unhide. And then I'm going to go ahead and click on row 1, and I'm just going to delete it because it's going to make things more complicated for us. When I right-click on a row number or a column letter and I click Delete, it's going to delete the entire row or the entire column, and it's going to shift everything up. So it's not like I won't have a row number 1 anymore. Row number 1 is just going to be now the row that has email address, title, first name, last name, all those column headers like I have already in the sheet. So I'll hit delete, and now we have no more secret top row. Row number 1 is just the headers now. We also have hidden columns here. If you notice, we go A, B, C, D, E, F, G, I. So column H is right here. I'm going to move my mouse over where it should be, at the top in between the column letters. click with my right mouse button or tap with 2 fingers on the touchpad and click unhide. And now we've got, you found it, you found it, you found it. And again, just for the sake of simplicity, I'm going to right click on column H and I'm going to hit delete so that way we just get rid of it. Okay, so now we actually have our sort of real data. One more place that data could be hiding though, well, let me show you. I'm going to come down here and I'm going to right click on the name of our sheet, which is protecting. When I right click on that, unhide is an option there as well. When I click there, I have a sheet that's called reference, which we actually don't use, and I've been intending to remove that one. But I also have one that's called, tellingly, hidden sheet. I'm going to click on that and click OK. And we get, you found it, and some nice fireworks. Lovely. And we could, I'll just leave that one there. We're just going to switch back over to the protecting sheet by clicking on it. Cool. Okay, so that's how you can hide stuff in your sheet, or you can hide whole sheets. That's not necessarily all that useful for keeping something secret. Like if somebody, if somebody has this knowledge about Excel, hiding a column or hiding a row, if they're determined to find it, if they're not just like, if they're not just kind of cruising by, if they're determined to find it, they probably will find it. And that's fine. Like typically the way that I use this is to hide away stuff that I'm not working on currently, or stuff that I need, but I'm not necessarily going to be dealing with a whole lot. Like a reference sheet, for example, where I could put, some extra information that I might need from time to time, or even information that my formulas might need to work, but I don't necessarily need, need anybody to see directly. That's a good question, Megan. Could you have unhidden the secret sheet by doing that with any sheet in the book? Absolutely. Yeah, you right click and click unhide. It works just the same from any sheet. And obviously, if you want to hide a sheet, you just right click on it and click hide, and it goes away. So let's see. Okay, so that's one way to protect, to basically just get information out of your way so that you don't have to worry about it, and potentially out of other people's way as well, so it's keeping the clutter to a minimum is basically what that's for. The next thing that you might want to do is you might want to protect specific information inside of a sheet from being messed with in a variety of ways. You might have information that's mission critical that you don't want just anyone editing. You might have information that's sensitive. You might even want to stop people from copying and pasting, although to be honest, if they're really determined, they can just look at it and copy it manually with their human hands. That's a possibility, or they can take a picture with their phone. So don't rely on this. This is not a security measure for keeping people's real sensitive information private or anything like that. But it is really useful, particularly for keeping people from accidentally making changes to important information inside of your workbook. So here's what we're going to do. First of all, so we locked all of our cells earlier, and that's where this becomes important, because we actually need to unlock some of them now. What I'm going to do is I'm going to come up to the top, and I'm going to select columns A through D, where the email address, title, and first name and last name are. So I'll just drag over from column A to column D to select all those columns. I'm going to right-click or tap with 2 fingers on a touchpad, click Format Cells, and I'm going to uncheck the box that says Locked here. I know this is weird. You'll see why in a second. But that unlocks these cells, which right now actually does nothing, but it's going to be useful. Okay, I'm also going to come over here and I'm going to select column H, I, J, K, L, and M by dragging over from column letter H. I'll right click, click on Format Cells, and again, I'll uncheck the locked checkbox and then click OK. So that just leaves us with, well, all the other cells from column N onward, or all the other columns from N onward are still locked. And these three columns with the credit card information, credit card number, the security code, and the expiration date, those cells we also kept locked. So now, here's what we need to do. I'm going to come up to the top, and I'm going to click on the Review tab. And then I'm going to click Protect Sheet. When I do that, I get this dialog box, Protect Sheet dialog box, with a check mark that says Protect Worksheet and Contents of Locked Cells. That's what we want. That's why we clicked on Protect Sheet. No idea why this check mark is here. Seems super redundant to me, but whatever. There's a blank for a password here. If you decide to use a password in this blank, please, for the love of all that is holy, write the password down somewhere or keep it somewhere safe. Save it in your password manager if you use one. And I do recommend you use a password manager, just to go way off track for a second. Put it somewhere that you're going to be able to find it, because if you forget this password and you don't have it recorded anywhere, then you are no longer going to be able to make changes to the locked cells on this sheet. But assuming you're doing that, you can put a password in there if you want to keep it from unauthorized tampering. If you just want to lock it so that there's a speed bump before somebody changes information that they probably shouldn't be changing, then you don't have to worry about a password. You just do this, forget the password, and then if somebody tries to make a change they shouldn't be making, they'll get an error message and they'll go, oh, I probably shouldn't have been changing that, and they'll go about their business. But if you need it for more security type stuff, then you'll need to put a password here, and you'll need to record that password somewhere. Okay, that's the password spiel. Down here at the bottom, we have a bunch of different options that we can check or not check. Allow all users of this worksheet to, and then there's a bunch of options here. The default is these two options at the top being checked. Select locked cells and select unlocked cells. If these are unchecked, then literally all the user of this workbook can do when they come along until they unprotect the sheet is they can, with their eyeballs, look at this sheet. They can't even click on a cell and say, like, this one right here. They literally can look with their eyes, and that's all. But underneath, we have a bunch of other stuff that we probably want to stop people from doing if we're protecting cells on this sheet. For example, format cells. In other words, change the font, change the colors, change, how numbers, the number formatting and things like that. We've got format columns, format rows. So you can change like the width and things like height and things like that. Inserting columns and rows, inserting hyperlinks, deleting columns and rows, goodness no. And sorting, auto-filtering, pivot tables, objects and scenarios. I don't even know what scenarios means, to be really honest with you. But the default options typically for most use cases are fine. These two top boxes checked, everything else unchecked. Because we're going to allow them to select locked cells. We're going to allow them to select unlocked cells. But we're not going to allow them to do anything else with locked cells. I'm going to click OK. And now that I've done that, if I want to make a change to, let's say, the street address here, I'm going to go up to the top and I'm going to start backspacing, and I'm going to hit enter, and it's fine. It works just fine because this is one of the many cells that we unlocked before we started protecting the sheet. I'll undo that. However, if I go over here and I try to start fiddling with the credit card numbers, the cell or chart you're trying to change is on a protected sheet. To make changes, click Unprotect Sheet in the Review tab. You might need a password. So, in this case, it's blocking me from doing that until I come up here and click Unprotect Sheet. Because I didn't enter a password, when I click Unprotect Sheet, it immediately unprotects. And I can fiddle with these credit card numbers all day if I want to. But, but as long as that protection is on, then any cells that we kept as locked, remember locked is the default, not unlocked. Any cells that we kept as locked, any cells that we didn't specifically unlock, will not be editable once the sheet is protected. So that's how you do protect sheet. By the way, when you get the dialog box here, if you type a password in, it is going to prompt you to retype that password one more time just to make sure you got it right. That's your opportunity to make sure you got it right and also write it down. Okay, so we talked about protecting our sheets. Let's talk about other stuff we can do that's kind of like that. By the way, if I did that and I wasn't able, or if I did that and I didn't unlock any of the cells, like for example, this sheet's just normal. I haven't made any changes to the locking or unlocking of these cells. If I click Protect Sheet on this one, all the cells are locked by default. So any of these that I try to make changes to, I get an error. It's just if we want to allow them to edit some cells even when the sheet is protected, that's why we unlocked those cells and we were able to make changes to them. Otherwise, it's just, whatever. Okay, so how do we, so there's other kind of bigger types of changes that we might want to avoid as well. One thing that we can do is we can click Protect Workbook up here. When we do that, it's going to give us this pop-up that says Protect Workbook for Structure and Windows. And again, it gives us an option for a password. If you type a password in there, it's going to prompt you to type it again. And again, you will need to remember what that password was, because otherwise you're up a creek. So if I don't put a password in here, though, I can just click OK, and it's going to protect the structure of the workbook. The window thing, by the way, that's like literally the layout. A lot of times, usually you don't need to do this, but you can look at a workbook with multiple windows open, and if you protect the window structure, it'll open it up in exactly the same window configuration that you had before. That's real weird. I don't know why you would do that, to be really honest, but you can. Okay. So now that Protect Workbook is lit up, what's protected? Because if I go over here and I try to say, get rid of this email address, that's fine. I can totally do that. No one can stop me. But there are some changes that I'm blocked from making now that I've turned Protect Workbook on. One of those changes, and pretty much all of those changes, have to do with sheets in my workbook. I can't insert a new sheet. I can't delete the current sheet or any other sheet in the entire workbook. I can't rename a sheet. I can't move a sheet in relation to the other sheets, or make a copy of a sheet in my workbook and use it somewhere else. I can't change the color of the little tab down here, which you can do in this menu. And I can't hide or unhide sheets. So any of that stuff is off limits now that I've protected the workbook. When they say protecting the structure of the workbook, what they're talking about is basically the layout of sheets, the number of sheets that are there, and the existence of the sheets. All of that is off limits if your workbook is protected with this button. Okay, finally, there's one last thing to do with protecting the entire file, and then we're going to move on to conditional formatting. That'll be our last topic for today. So if we want to protect our entire Excel file, we can do that. The way that works is I'm going to go to the File tab up here at the top left, and I'm going to click on Protect Workbook. And what I would do is click Encrypt with Password. And then I'm not going to follow through with this, but I could type a password here. I would confirm that password by typing it the exact same way again. And then when I hit OK, after typing the password a second time, my entire Excel file would be encrypted using this password. If I have the password, then Excel can decrypt it and open it up for me, and I can make changes to it and view it and all of that stuff. If I do not have that password, or if, knock on wood, I were to lose that password, then neither I nor anybody else would be able to get into my Excel file. So again, you want to be super careful with this, but if you want to keep somebody out, that's how you do it. By the way, also, I guess I should say, I haven't found this to be entirely reliable. Sometimes it just doesn't seem to work. So test it out and make sure, if you're using this, test it out and make sure it actually worked, that it actually asks you for the password before it opens the file up. Because it doesn't seem to always work for some weird reason. So you might, if it's a file that's really sensitive, you might think about other security measures for keeping it safe. For example, putting it behind some other kind of password, or keeping it in encrypted, cloud storage, or, things like that. Okay, so that's encrypting our entire file if we really want to do that. Okay, so let's move on to conditional formatting, the last topic for today. So this sheet will look familiar to you. We're actually not going to tackle all of there's one further example in the handout that we're not going to get to because of time. I do encourage you to look through that in the handout and play with the example file if you're interested. Okay, conditional formatting. Conditional formatting allows you to change, the formatting of your cells based on certain rules. When I say formatting in computer world, what we're talking about is the way that information looks, not the actual underlying information. For example, I could have this same exact spreadsheet, but everything could be orange and blue, and it could be in a giant file size where if I printed it out, it would take up this entire room. That's totally doable. That's called formatting, though. Once I make a change to the actual names that are in this list or things like that, that is not a formatting change. That's a change in the data, the content that we have there. So, so when we talk about conditional formatting, that's what we mean. The conditional part is it's based on certain rules, and we're going to figure out how to make those rules and make Excel follow them. So here we go. First things first, this is a pretty easy one. What we're going to do is over here in column I, you'll notice I have that priority. So all of these customer service cases that we saw before are labeled with a priority of 1 to 10. And what we want to do is we want to highlight the ones that are higher priority. In fact, what I want to do is have high priority be red and low priority be green and, kind of in the middle be yellow. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to deselect Protect Workbook just in case. I don't think it'll matter, but just in case. Okay, I'm going to come up here to my Home tab again, and I'm going to click on the Conditional Formatting button. And then under that, I'm going to go to Color Scales. And there are a couple of different options with red, yellow, and green like I talked about a second ago. This one over here, when I move my mouse over it, you'll see a preview in the actual sheet. And you'll notice 10 is green and 2 is red down there. So that's the opposite of what I want. But this one, thankfully, is what I want. So 10 is going to be the reddest red, and 1 is going to be the greenest green, more or less. So I'll click on that, and that gives me all my priorities color-coded. So I now have bright red for, priority 10. I have kind of a goldish for priority 7. I have like, I have kind of like a sort of a lighter green for 4, and then even lighter for 3, and so on and so forth, all the way down. So now I can see exactly what I'm, I can see exactly what I need to, I can tell exactly what I need to tell at a glance by saying, oh, there's a priority 10, there's a 10, there's a 9. I better get on those and stay focused on the high priority cases, right? So that's one option. Another way that we can do this is we can color code our cells based on, or in fact a whole row, based on a cell reference. So, or no, sorry, we're not going to do a whole row yet. We're going to do just these cells. So over here in column H, we have the number of days that I've had these cases open. You'll notice a new thing over here on the right, which is close cases within 5 days. And 5 is in its own cell, so that Excel sees the 5 as just an actual number 5 and is able to do math with it for reasons that you'll see in just a moment. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here and I'm going to select all of column H again, or column H rather than column I. And then I'm going to come up to the top again and click on Conditional Formatting. I'm going to move my mouse over Highlight Cells Rules, which always sounds wrong to me. And I'm going to go to greater than right here. Okay, format cells that are greater than, and then it just guesses, well, 4.5, how about that? With light red fill with dark red text. And you can see a preview of it again if I look at my actual sheet. So it's going to have dark red text and light red or pink fill color in the cell. But I don't want 4.5. I actually want to base it on this cell over here. That way, if the rule changes, if they're like, oh, you've got 6 days to close cases now, or oh, you better close those cases within 4 days, then it's always updated. With, I can update the rule just by changing this cell to a different number. So what I'm going to do is click on the little button here once again to kind of roll this up like a window shade. I'm going to click on the cell with 5 in it, and you'll notice $K, $2. It's cell K2. I'll click the button to unroll, and I'll click OK. And that's going to give me all of the cases that have been open longer than 5 days are red with a pink background. All the ones that are less than 5 days aren't highlighted at all. They look exactly the same. And again, if I change this number, let's say I change it to 6, then that cell that was 6 now turns back to kind of regular coloring. Change it to 4. I get more cells highlighted in red and pink. All right, let's do one last kind of conditional formatting. And this one's a little bit different. The way this is going to work is we're going to color code our entire row right here. We're going to do it using a formula. Sorry we ran a little long. You can see the rest on the YouTube channel if you want to catch up with the end of it. And see you tomorrow. So what we're going to do is we're going to go up to the top, click on my column A column letter here, and drag over until we get columns A through H selected. Column I, the cells are always going to be color coded, so I'm going to leave that one alone. But A through H we've got selected now. And what we want to do is go up again to Conditional Formatting, click on manage rules this time. And when I click on that, it gives me this little pop-up box, Conditional Formatting Rules Manager. So you can see all the rules that already apply to the cells I had selected, which is only one rule, which is, if it's more than 4 now, make it red text and pink cell fill color. So I'm going to come up here and click on New Rule. When I do that, it gives me the New Formatting Rule dialog box. And I've got a bunch of different options here where I can basically just replicate the pre-made rules that they already have built into Excel for me. But I can also come down here and I can click Use a formula to determine which cells to format. When I do that, it says Format Values where this formula is true. In other words, where the answer to the formula is true based on the information in a particular cell. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to go $if, open a set of parentheses, so we'll go Shift 9. And then I'm going to do $C1. So I've got $C1 there to tell Excel, okay, the row number can change. We do want the row numbers to change for this formula because we're going to be using this formula all the way down in each of these columns. But we don't want the column letter to change. We want the column letter to be C always, regardless of which cell we're trying to format. So if we're looking at cell A8, we want to look, over here to the right in column C and see whether this customer is a consumer, a government customer, or a business customer. That's what we're going to be color coding. I should have said that before we started making this rule, but that's what we're going to be doing. We're going to be color coding these rows based on which customer type we have. So if it's a consumer customer type, we're going to give it one color. If it's a business customer type, we're going to give it another color. If it's a government customer type, we're going to give it a third color. And so we always want, regardless of which cell on the row we're trying to format, we always want it to look at column C to determine what color the cells should be. So here we go. So if C1 equals sign, and then inside quotation marks the word consumer, and then quotation mark again. So it's quotation mark, consumer, quotation mark. Make sure you type consumer correctly. And then I'll put a comma after the quotation marks. So that's our logical test. And again, because we're typing this in kind of a dialog box, Excel's not going to give us the little hint system, which is kind of a shame. But we're writing it in the exact same way that we used the if function before. We've got a logical test, value if true, value if false. So we're going, so if C1 is equal to consumer in quotation marks, then our value if true is going to be just the word true in capitals. I'm not actually 100% sure the capitals are required, but it can't hurt. And so I would recommend you do it. You'll notice we're typing the word true without any quotation marks. If you want to get technical, if you don't, please ignore what I'm about to say and just skip over it in your brain. If you want to get technical, this is what we call a Boolean value, which basically is just a Boolean value is going to be either true or false. It's like almost like the concept of true or false in computer world. And so when we type true like this, we're saying this is actually true, essentially. And that's our value of true, fittingly. Then I'm going to put a comma after true, and I'm going to type false the same way. That's our value if false. And then I'm going to shift 0 to close my parentheses. So again, let's say that we're looking at this cell specifically, cell D4, where we have Sophie Garrison's case number, right? So we're looking at cell D4. we're going to say if C1, well, we're not on row 1 anymore, so we can move down to row 4. So if C4 is equal to consumer, then value if true is true. So basically our formula comes out, if we were typing it just in a cell here, then the cell would literally say true right there. Or if it turned out they weren't a consumer, then it would say false right there. But in this case, true and false are the answers to this formula. And in this case, true is the answer to the formula on row 4 specifically. So if we get true, if that's what comes out of this formula, what do we do? Well, I'm going to click on Format here, and I'm going to tell it. Well, we just want to fill it with a color. So I'm going to click Fill up at the top, and I'm going to choose kind of a light blue. Then I'll click OK, and then I'll click OK again. And now we have our formula. Or now we have our rule showing up right here. Now, one key thing that I forgot to do that we need to do really quick. You'll notice that it's selected here. I'm going to click Edit Rule just for a sec. Come down here, and I'm just going to drag my mouse over this so that this is highlighted in gray. Right-click on it and click Copy. Or you can press, select it and press Control-C on your keyboard, Command-C if it's a Mac, and click OK. I copied that so that that way we can reuse this formula fairly quickly, which we want to do. OK, so we've done that. Now I'm going to click New Rule again. Use a formula to determine which cells to format. Click in the blank right here, right-click and click Paste, or press Control-V, Command-V on a Mac. So we've got the same exact formula here again. But this time, instead of consumer, I'm going to click in here, and I'm going to delete that. And I'm going to change consumer to government. And then I'll come down here and click Format. Let's say we change it to light orange. OK, cool. And then I'll click OK again. So now we have two rules. Our business customers will be highlighted in blue, our government customers in orange. Finally, I'll click New Rule one more time. Use a formula to determine which cells to format. I'll right-click in the blank, or I'll click in the blank and then right-click, click Paste, and then change consumer to business. And again, make sure you spell business correctly because otherwise it won't work. I'll click on Format, and we'll make it, I don't know, light yellow. I'll click OK. Click OK one more time. And then if I click Apply, I can see all of these rules without closing the box. Or if I click OK, I can see them. I'm pretty confident I got it right. I'll click OK. There we go. So now all of our consumer customers are highlighted in blue. All of our government customers highlighted in orange. All of our business customers highlighted in yellow. If I change one of these drop-down boxes to be, say, business, for example, oh, now it's yellow. Because all it's doing is for each cell on this row, at least each of the cells that we had highlighted in these certain columns, it's looking at column C and it's saying, like, does this match consumer? No? OK. Does this match business? Oh, yeah, it does. OK. So that's true. So we apply this color coding to it. And that's it. OK, so we're running way long. I'm so sorry. Thank you so much for hanging out. If you have questions, go ahead and type them in the chat. That's totally fine. If you need to head out, that's totally fine too. I'll see you tomorrow. Tomorrow we're going to be talking about pivot tables. And pivot tables are really cool. Pivot tables are basically, if you know people who know how to use Excel, if they're like, if they're not complete Excel, like crazy power users, then they probably know what pivot tables are and they might be a little scared of them. So if you tell people that you know how to use pivot tables, they're going to look at you like you're some kind of wizard. And it's pretty cool. But they're not that hard. You just have to know a couple of little tricks in order to get them to work properly. And then you can do tons of cool stuff with them. Let's see. I don't see any other questions so far. Let me check one other window here really quick. Whoop, that's not the right button at all. It's not even the right keyboard. Okay, yeah, I don't see any questions. If you have questions later, you can email me, nsmith@calus.org, like I said earlier. Otherwise, I will see y'all tomorrow. Thank you so much for hanging out with me for Excel Part 3. See you at noon for Part 4.